The sun dipped low over Charleston, South Carolina, painting the city in hues of amber and crimson. Lucas Hastings sat in the back seat of his father's sleek black car, the engine purring quietly as they cruised past the iconic waterfront. He barely registered the beauty outside, his mind preoccupied with the stern ultimatum William Hastings had just delivered during their tense dinner meeting. "You have 1 week, Lucas," his father had said, his voice cold but deliberate. 1 week to find a job. If you can't prove you're capable of holding your own, you'll come to Hastings Enterprises and take charge of the Riverside project. Lucas knew better than to argue. William Hastings, CEO of the city's most powerful real estate development firm, wasn't a man who entertained debates. His word was final. Lucas had always managed to scrape by with charm and deflection, but he sensed this time his father wasn't bluffing. The stakes were higher now. The Riverside Park project was a public relations nightmare, and his father saw it as Lucas's chance to finally step into the family legacy. But Lucas didn't care about legacy, or real estate, or Riverside Park for that matter. As far as he was concerned, the sprawling green space was just another piece of land waiting to be monetized. Yet the thought of being forced into a corporate suit and tie, working alongside his father, was worse than any other option. He had to find something, anything, to avoid that fate. The car came to a stop outside his downtown penthouse. Lucas stepped out, his designer loafers clicking against the pavement as he strode into the building. As the elevator climbed to his floor, he leaned back against the mirrored wall, the weight of his father's ultimatum pressing down on him. He needed a plan, and he needed it fast. Meanwhile, on the other side of Charleston, Eva Carter tightened her ponytail and adjusted her tote bag, which was stuffed with flyers bearing bold letters, "Save Riverside Park." Beside her, Grace Walker held a roll of tape, a skeptical frown on her face. "Are you sure about this, Eva?" Grace asked, glancing nervously at the quiet residential street where they stood. "We've already distributed a ton of flyers. Maybe it's enough for tonight." Eva shook her head. "It's never enough," she said firmly. "The more people know what's at stake, the better. This park isn't just a green space. It's history, it's community. And if we don't fight for it, who will?" Grace sighed, but she didn't argue. She admired Eva's determination, even if she sometimes thought her best friend pushed herself too hard. Together, they moved under the cover of night, posting flyers on streetlights and fences, ensuring their message reached every corner of the neighborhood. They approached the park's entrance, a familiar path lined with grand oak trees draped in Spanish moss. Eva paused for a moment, looking out over the open field where families often gathered for picnics and children played under the watchful gaze of the historic statue at the center. "This place deserves more," Eva murmured. "Not a soulless strip mall." "You're preaching to the choir," Grace said, nudging her with an elbow. "Let's get these up before security spots us." As they worked, Eva's mind raced with thoughts of the upcoming city council meeting. She had just a week to gather enough signatures to formally oppose the project. It felt like an impossible task, but Eva thrived on challenges. She didn't know who the Hastings family thought they were, but she wasn't about to let them bulldoze her city's legacy without a fight. Eva and Grace finished posting the last of their flyers near the park's entrance, their footsteps crunching softly on the gravel path as they headed back toward Grace's car. The moonlight filtered through the trees, casting dappled shadows across their faces. Eva glanced over her shoulder, her gaze lingering on the park as though committing it to memory. She couldn't shake the feeling that this fight was bigger than any she'd taken on before. As they reached the car, a sharp beam of light swept across the lot. Grace froze. "Security," she whispered urgently, tugging on Eva's arm. Eva's jaw tightened. "I'm not running," she replied in a low voice, though her heart raced. If they catch us, I'll explain. We're not doing anything illegal. Grace groaned. Eva, not everything has to be a battle. Let's just get out of here. Before Eva could respond, a voice called out from behind them. Hey, what are you two doing over there? They spun around to see a uniformed security guard, flashlight in hand, making his way toward them. Eva straightened her shoulders, preparing to defend their actions. But before she could speak, Grace yanked her toward the car. Get in! Grace hissed, fumbling for her keys. They scrambled inside, slamming the doors, just as the security guard broke into a jog. Grace started the car with a nervous laugh, the tires kicking up a spray of gravel as they sped off. That was close, Grace muttered, gripping the wheel tightly. Eva frowned, glancing at the stack of flyers in her lap. We didn't finish the job. Eva, Grace said, her voice rising with exasperation, you're amazing, but you're also exhausting. Take a break, okay? You can't save the world in one night. Eva leaned back in her seat, her fingers still clutching the flyers. She didn't respond. Grace's words had weight, but Eva couldn't shake the urgency of their mission. The Hastings family had money, power, and influence on their side. What did she have? Flyers and a dream? The next morning, Lucas sat at the breakfast bar in his penthouse, scrolling aimlessly through job listings on his tablet. None of them seemed remotely interesting. He could see his father's smirk already, mocking him for his inability to commit to anything meaningful. A sharp knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. He opened it to find Nathan Miller, his oldest friend and frequent partner in trouble, standing there with a coffee in hand and a mischievous grin. "Morning, sunshine," Nathan greeted, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "How's the great job hunt going?" Lucas rolled his eyes. "It's not. Everything looks boring, and I don't feel like wasting my time on something I'm going to hate." "Well, you better figure it out soon," Nathan teased, plopping onto the couch. "Big Bill doesn't strike me as the forgiving type." Lucas sighed, flopping down beside him. "Tell me something I don't know." Nathan sipped his coffee, studying Lucas thoughtfully. "You know, you could try something totally random, like, I don't know, work at one of those food trucks downtown. People love those things." Lucas raised an eyebrow. "A food truck? Seriously? Why not?" Nathan shrugged. "It's not like you're looking for a career. It'd just be a quick way to show your dad you're doing something productive." The idea was ridiculous, but Lucas couldn't deny that it intrigued him. It was so far removed from his life of privilege that it might actually work. Besides, he figured anything was better than ending up at Hastings Enterprises. "All right," Lucas said, a sly grin spreading across his face. "Let's see what food trucks Charleston has to offer." Nathan laughed, shaking his head. "I was kidding, but hey, go wild. You might actually surprise yourself." As Lucas began his search, he couldn't help but feel a flicker of excitement. Maybe, just maybe, this unconventional idea would buy him the time he needed. Little did he know, the path he was about to take would lead him directly into Eva Carter's world, and into a fight far bigger than he could have imagined. Lucas parked his car along the bustling street, stepping out into the lively downtown Charleston morning. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee and sizzling breakfast food wafted through the air as vendors and food trucks lined the curb. He surveyed the scene with mild curiosity, his tailored jacket and polished shoes making him stand out among the casually dressed crowd. He hadn't told Nathan about this little expedition. It seemed too ridiculous to explain, even to his best friend. Instead, he'd spent the morning scrolling through social media and reviews, searching for a food truck that might have a spot open. One name kept popping up: Antonia's Grill. The reviews were glowing, praising not only the food, but also the community atmosphere it created. It sounded like exactly the sort of place his father would scoff at, which only made Lucas more determined. He spotted the food truck parked at the edge of a small lot near the market square. Its bright red exterior was adorned with hand-painted flowers, and a cheerful sign read, "Antonia's Grill, good food, better people." A small line of customers had already formed, chatting and laughing as they waited for their orders. Lucas straightened his shoulders, trying to suppress the nervous energy building in his chest, and approached the truck. Inside, Eva Carter moved with practiced efficiency. She handed a tray of breakfast sandwiches to a smiling customer before turning her attention to a pot of simmering grits. Her boss, Antonia Rossi, worked beside her, calling out orders in a thick Italian accent and occasionally muttering under her breath about the slow pace of the young people around her. "Move faster, Eva. The customers, they are hungry, not patient," Antonia barked, though there was no malice in her tone. Eva grinned despite herself. "Yes, boss. Faster. Got it." As Lucas neared the truck, Eva noticed him lingering at the edge of the line. Something about his presence caught her attention, not just the expensive shoes and watch, but the way he seemed unsure of himself, as though he didn't quite belong in the vibrant chaos of the market. She wiped her hands on her apron and leaned out of the truck window. "Looking for breakfast, or are you just sightseeing?" she called, her voice light but curious. Lucas blinked, startled by her directness. He recovered quickly, flashing the easy smile that had gotten him out of trouble more times than he could count. "Actually, I'm looking for a job." The line of customers quieted slightly as heads turned in his direction. Eva raised an eyebrow, exchanging a glance with Antonia, who had paused mid-order to size Lucas up. "A job?" Antonia repeated, crossing her arms. "You think you can just walk up to my truck and ask for work? This is not a fancy restaurant. You will sweat here. You will work hard here." Lucas nodded, his smile never wavering. "I'm not afraid of hard work. I'll do whatever it takes." Eva frowned, skepticism flickering in her eyes. "What's your experience?" "I've cooked before," Lucas said, stretching the truth with ease. He had, technically, though his experience was limited to 1 or 2 attempts at following online recipes in his luxury kitchen. "I'm quick to learn, and I'll do whatever you need." Antonia stared at him for a long moment, then turned to Eva. "You trust him?" Eva hesitated. There was something off about him. He didn't quite fit the usual mold of people who worked for Antonia's Grill, but there was also something genuine in his expression, something that made her want to give him a chance. "Let's see what he's got," Eva said finally, handing Lucas an apron. "You mess up, you're out. Deal?" Lucas nodded, sliding the apron over his expensive shirt. "Deal." Antonia clapped her hands. "Good. Now stop standing there like a statue and get to work." The line moved forward again, and Lucas stepped into the truck, unsure of what he had just gotten himself into. Lucas quickly realized that stepping into the food truck was like walking into a whirlwind. The cramped space buzzed with movement, noise, and the mouth-watering aroma of sizzling bacon and freshly brewed coffee. Eva was a blur of efficiency, flipping sandwiches, pouring drinks, and chatting with customers all at once. Antonia, meanwhile, barked orders in her thick accent, her energy commanding the space like a general on a battlefield. "Start with something simple," Antonia shouted, shoving a tray of raw ingredients toward Lucas. "Toast the bread, spread the sauce, then layer the eggs and bacon. Easy, yes? Even a child could do it." Lucas nodded quickly, picking up a slice of bread and trying to look as though he belonged. But as he reached for the sauce, his hand brushed the tray, sending a small pile of bacon tumbling to the floor. The sound of the metal tray clattering made Eva glance over, and her lips twitched in amusement as she caught his panicked expression. "First rule," Eva said, tilting her head toward him, "don't waste the bacon." "Antonia takes that personally." Antonia whirled around, catching the tail end of the comment. She glared at Lucas, pointing a finger so close to his face that he instinctively stepped back. "Yes, bacon is sacred. You waste it again, I waste you. Understand? Yes, ma'am, Lucas said hurriedly, stooping to clean up the mess. The first half hour was a series of small disasters. Lucas burned the edges of toast, spilled coffee on his apron, and almost sent a carton of eggs tumbling off the counter. Yet he never stopped trying, determined to keep up with the relentless pace. Eva noticed his struggles but refrained from offering much help, deciding to let him sink or swim on his own. Eventually, he managed to assemble his first sandwich, a simple bacon, egg and cheese on toasted sourdough. He placed it on the counter, his hands slightly trembling as the waiting customer grabbed it and took a bite. Lucas watched nervously, his heart pounding in his chest. The customer's eyes widened. "Hey, this is actually pretty good." Lucas exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. A small wave of pride washed over him as Eva glanced his way, her expression softening slightly. "Not bad," she admitted, "but don't let it go to your head. That was the easiest thing on the menu." Antonia snorted. "One sandwich and he thinks he's a chef. Keep going, new guy. There are 20 more orders waiting." Lucas dove back into the chaos, this time with a little more confidence. As he worked, he began to pick up on the rhythm of the truck, how Eva seamlessly juggled tasks, how Antonia's gruffness was laced with genuine care, how the customers' smiles lit up the small space. For the first time in years, he felt a flicker of satisfaction from something other than privilege. By the time the morning rush began to slow, Lucas's shirt was soaked with sweat, and his arms ached from the constant motion. He leaned against the counter, catching his breath as Eva handed a drink to the last customer in line. "You survived," she said, tossing him a water bottle. Her tone was teasing, but not unkind. "Barely," Lucas replied, uncapping the bottle and taking a long drink. "Does it always feel like this?" "Every day," Eva said with a grin. "But you did better than I expected." Antonia emerged from the back, wiping her hands on her apron. She gave Lucas an appraising look. "You didn't quit. That's more than I can say for most." Lucas straightened, a small sense of pride swelling in his chest. "So, does that mean I got the job?" Antonia shrugged. "You can stay, but if you mess up my kitchen again, you're out. No second chances." Lucas smiled, the first genuine one in a long time. "Deal." As the truck quieted and the three of them began cleaning up, Eva watched Lucas out of the corner of her eye. There was still something about him that didn't quite add up, but he'd shown grit today, and she had to respect that. Maybe he wasn't as out of place here as she'd initially thought. Little did she know, Lucas's presence in her world was about to shake everything she cared about to its core. The late afternoon sun bathed the small square in a warm golden light as Eva set up a folding table next to the food truck. She arranged a neat stack of flyers, a clipboard, and a sign-up sheet for signatures on one side of the table. Across the top, in bold red letters, the sign read, "Save Riverside Park. Sign the petition today." Lucas emerged from the truck, wiping his hands on a towel. He paused when he saw Eva working on the setup, her movements purposeful and confident as she checked the materials. "What's this?" he asked, stepping closer. His voice carried a mix of curiosity and caution. Eva glanced at him. "It's for the petition drive. I set it up whenever the food truck parks here. People come for the food, and while they're waiting, I convince them to support the park." Lucas raised an eyebrow. "And does it work?" "Sometimes," Eva admitted. "People are busy or they think one park doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things. But when I explain how much this space means to the community, they start to understand." Her tone softened, her conviction shining through. "We're so close to getting enough signatures to bring this to the city council. Every name counts." Lucas nodded. though he felt a pang of guilt tugging at his chest. Standing here with Eva, listening to her passion for the park, made his father's project feel even more suffocating. For years, Lucas had avoided thinking about the impact of Hastings Enterprises' developments, but now he couldn't escape it. Before he could respond, a voice cut through the chatter of the square. "Eva!" Lucas turned to see a tall, athletic man striding toward the table. His confident demeanor was matched by an easy smile that hinted at charisma, the kind that drew people in effortlessly. He carried a small bundle of folded petitions under one arm. "Caleb Rivers," the man said, extending a hand to Eva. "I'm the new volunteer. Grace mentioned your work, and I knew I had to get involved." Eva smiled warmly, shaking his hand. "Thanks for joining us, Caleb. Every bit of help makes a difference." Lucas felt an unexpected pang of annoyance as Caleb's gaze lingered on Eva for just a moment too long. He shifted his weight, crossing his arms over his chest, but said nothing. "I've already collected a few signatures from the coffee shop up the street," Caleb continued, holding up the petitions. "People were really receptive." Eva beamed. "That's amazing. We could use someone with your energy." Caleb's grin widened, and he glanced at Lucas for the first time. "And you are?" "Lucas," he replied simply, his tone neutral. "Lucas works with the food truck," Eva added, gesturing toward him. "He's been helping out a lot." Caleb's smile didn't falter, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes. Curiosity, maybe, or subtle scrutiny. "Good to know. Looks like we've got a strong team here." "Let's hope so," Eva said. "The council meeting is only a week away. We need to push harder than ever." The three began working together, approaching people in the square and explaining the petition. Caleb proved to be as charismatic as he looked, effortlessly engaging strangers and convincing them to sign. Lucas, on the other hand, found himself fumbling through the conversations, his usual charm feeling out of place in such a genuine cause. He glanced at Eva, who was moving through the crowd with ease, her determination shining through every word she spoke. Lucas couldn't help but admire her, but the more he watched, the heavier his guilt became. He was lying to her, to all of them, about who he was and why he was here. "Hey," Eva said, interrupting his thoughts as she approached. She held out a clipboard. "Why don't you take this side of the square? We've got a good flow going. The more people we reach, the better." Lucas hesitated, then nodded, forcing a smile. "Sure, I'll do my best." As he moved off to his assigned section, Caleb leaned closer to Eva, his tone dropping slightly. "So, what's his story?" "Lucas?" Eva asked, glancing in his direction. "He's interesting. A little rough around the edges, but he's been a big help." Caleb hummed thoughtfully, watching Lucas interact with a passerby. "He doesn't seem like the usual type for this kind of work." Eva shrugged. "Maybe not, but he's here. That's what matters." Caleb smiled faintly, but as his gaze lingered on Lucas, a flicker of suspicion crossed his expression. The square grew quieter as the sun dipped closer to the horizon, casting long shadows across the cobblestones. Most of the tables and vendors had packed up for the day, leaving only a handful of passers-by strolling through the market. Lucas returned to the food truck with his clipboard, the sheet of signatures only half full. He felt a twinge of frustration. It wasn't as though he'd expected to be good at this, but the sting of being outshined by Caleb was undeniable. "Not bad," Eva said, taking the clipboard from him and scanning the sheet. "Every signature counts." "Caleb seems to be better at it," Lucas muttered, glancing across the square where Caleb was still chatting animatedly with a small group. The people around him laughed, some nodding enthusiastically as they scribbled their names onto his petition. Eva tilted her head, her expression curious. "You're not used to feeling out of your depth, are you?" Lucas raised an eyebrow. "What makes you say that?" She smiled, leaning against the truck's counter. "You've got this air about you, like someone who's always been in control. This kind of work, it's messy, unpredictable. It's not something you can charm your way through." He opened his mouth to respond, but stopped, unsure of what to say. Was she seeing through him already? Did she suspect the truth? Instead, he forced a laugh, trying to deflect. "Guess I'll have to learn to be a little less polished then." Eva studied him for a moment longer before nodding. "You're trying. That's more than I can say for most people." Before the conversation could continue, Caleb returned, his energy still as vibrant as when he'd arrived. He handed Eva another full sheet of signatures, grinning triumphantly. 24 more names, he announced. "That should put us a lot closer to the goal." "Wow," Eva said, genuinely impressed. "You're a natural at this." "It's all about the pitch," Caleb replied, his tone light but confident. He glanced at Lucas, his smile tightening ever so slightly. "But I guess not everyone's cut out for it." Lucas clenched his jaw, resisting the urge to fire back. Instead, he turned toward the truck, grabbing a stack of paper cups to distract himself. He didn't know why Caleb irritated him so much. It wasn't as though he cared what the guy thought. Still, something about the way Caleb carried himself felt off. Too smooth, too calculated. As the three of them began packing up for the evening, Caleb struck up a conversation with Eva about the council meeting. Lucas stayed quiet, listening as Caleb offered suggestions for rallying more support, his tone dripping with enthusiasm. It was almost too perfect, and Lucas couldn't help but feel that Caleb's charm had a purpose beyond saving the park. Later that night, as Eva locked up the food truck, she found Lucas leaning against the side, gazing at the park entrance. The oak trees swayed gently in the breeze, their silhouettes illuminated by the streetlights. "You okay?" she asked, her voice soft. He turned to her, his expression unusually serious. "Do you ever wonder if it's enough? What we're doing here?" Eva hesitated, then nodded. "All the time. But if we don't try, then what's the point? Even small victories matter." Lucas looked back at the trees, her words resonating in a way he hadn't expected. For the first time, he felt the weight of what she was fighting for, and what he was helping his father destroy. As they stood in the quiet of the evening, Caleb watched them from across the street. His friendly smile from earlier was gone, replaced by a calculating look. Pulling out his phone, he tapped out a quick message to Olivia Morgan. "The new guy is worth watching." Something doesn't add up. The message sent, Caleb slipped the phone back into his pocket and disappeared into the shadows, his intentions hidden beneath his polished exterior. Whatever game he was playing, Lucas and Eva had no idea they were now part of it. The morning air was crisp as Eva rolled up the food truck's windows, letting in the gentle hum of life in the city square. Vendors were beginning to set up their stalls, and the familiar clatter of crates and soft murmur of greetings filled the space. Lucas arrived shortly after, his expression a mix of determination and fatigue. It was clear he hadn't had much sleep, though he didn't mention why. "You're early," Eva noted, handing him an apron. "I figured I'd get a head start," Lucas replied, tying the apron around his waist. "Yesterday wasn't exactly my best showing." Eva smirked, wiping down the counter. "You're learning. That counts for something." Antonia appeared from the back of the truck, already barking instructions. "No standing around. Prep the sauce, slice the bread, and keep the line moving. People don't like to wait for their food." Lucas nodded and got to work, immersing himself in the rhythm of the truck. The chaos of the morning rush seemed less daunting now, and he found himself falling into a steady pace. Eva worked beside him, seamlessly managing orders while offering him occasional pointers. As the rush began to slow, Eva noticed Caleb weaving through the crowd with his usual confident stride. He carried another clipboard, the pages already covered in neat signatures. Eva waved him over, grateful for the help. "Morning, superstar," Eva greeted, her tone light. "How's it going out there?" "Better than expected," Caleb replied, his smile as easy as ever. "People seem more willing to sign when you hit them with a little charm." "Clearly," Lucas muttered under his breath, earning a sideways glance from Caleb. Eva didn't notice the tension between them as she flipped through the signatures. "This is great. At this rate, we might actually hit our goal before the council meeting." "That's the plan," Caleb said smoothly. "But we should think bigger. What if we organized a rally? Something that'll get the media's attention." Eva paused, considering the idea. "A rally could work. It would show the council that the community is behind us." "Exactly," Caleb said, leaning closer. "I can handle the logistics, permits, outreach, the whole thing. I've done this kind of stuff before." Lucas frowned, setting down the tray of bread he was holding. "Shouldn't we run that by everyone first? A rally's a big move, and it could backfire if we're not careful." Caleb's smile didn't falter, but there was a sharpness in his eyes as he turned to Lucas. "Of course, I'm just brainstorming, but from what I've seen, hesitation doesn't win battles." Eva raised a hand, cutting through the tension. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves. It's a good idea, Caleb, but we'll need to talk it over with the group." Lucas glanced at her, his expression unreadable. He wanted to say more, but something in Eva's tone told him to drop it. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that Caleb's enthusiasm was masking something deeper. As the morning gave way to the afternoon, the trio continued their efforts, but the underlying friction between Lucas and Caleb grew more evident. Eva, focused on the task at hand, seemed oblivious to the subtle jabs and guarded looks exchanged between the two men. The tension simmered, threatening to boil over as they pushed toward their goal. By mid-afternoon, the square had filled with a steady stream of people, and the petition table saw a surprising amount of traffic. Eva managed the sign-ups, while Lucas worked double duty between helping at the food truck and engaging passers-by about the cause. Caleb, ever the charismatic figure, moved effortlessly through the crowd, drawing attention to the table and encouraging more people to sign. "Another 20 signatures," Caleb announced triumphantly as he returned to the table, dropping his clipboard beside Eva's. "That puts us even closer." "That's amazing," Eva said, her face lighting up. "At this rate, we'll have enough to present to the council with a strong case." Lucas glanced at Caleb, biting back the urge to point out how much Caleb seemed to enjoy taking credit. Instead, he focused on handing out a few more flyers to a family standing nearby, forcing himself to ignore the growing frustration simmering beneath the surface. "Lucas," Eva called, waving him over. He approached the table, wiping his hands on his apron. "We're running low on flyers. Could you grab another stack from the truck?" "Sure," he said, nodding as he headed back to the truck. He climbed inside, searching for the box of flyers stashed beneath the counter. As he pulled it out, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He hesitated, then checked the screen. It was a message from Nathan. "Any updates? Your dad's been asking questions. Keep me in the loop." Lucas frowned, his grip tightening on the phone. The weight of the double life he was leading pressed heavily on him. Every day he spent with Eva and the others only deepened his guilt. He hated the thought of how they'd react if they knew who he really was. Shoving the phone back into his pocket, Lucas grabbed the flyers and returned to the table. Caleb was leaning casually against the edge, chatting with Eva about rally logistics. Their easy rapport only added to Lucas's growing discomfort. "So, what's the next step after the rally?" Caleb asked, his tone light but calculated. "If the council doesn't listen, what's the backup plan?" Eva sighed. "I don't want to think that far ahead yet. The rally needs to make an impact. If we can show how many people care about the park, it'll be harder for them to ignore us. That's true, Caleb said, nodding, but you should always have a contingency, just in case. Lucas set the stack of flyers on the table with a little more force than necessary, drawing their attention. Maybe we focus on the first step before planning for failure, he said pointedly. Eva glanced between the two of them, sensing the tension. Let's all take a breath, she said firmly. We're on the same side here. Of course, Caleb said, his smile returning. Just trying to be practical. Lucas didn't respond, instead busying himself with organizing the flyers, but as he worked, his unease with Caleb deepened. Something about the man's polished charm felt too rehearsed, too perfect. Lucas couldn't shake the feeling that Caleb was playing a game no one else could see. Later that evening, as the crowd thinned and the group began packing up, Eva noticed Lucas lingering near the truck. His usual confident demeanor seemed subdued, and she approached him cautiously. "Hey," she said softly. "You okay?" Lucas hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, just a long day." She studied him for a moment, sensing there was more he wasn't saying. "You've been doing great, you know. I know this isn't exactly your world, but you've been stepping up." He looked at her, surprised by her words. "Thanks. That means a lot." As Eva turned back to the table to finish packing, Caleb watched them from a distance, his expression unreadable. Pulling his phone from his pocket, he typed out another message to Olivia. "We need to talk. I've got more on Lucas, and I think he's hiding something." The message sent, Caleb slipped the phone away, his thoughts racing. Whatever Lucas's secrets were, Caleb intended to find out and use them to his advantage. The next morning dawned with a cool breeze sweeping through the streets of Charleston. Lucas arrived at the food truck earlier than usual, the quiet hum of the city still waking up around him. He busied himself with setting up the truck, carefully arranging ingredients and supplies under Antonia's watchful eye. It was a moment of calm, but his thoughts were anything but. The weight of the text from Nathan the previous day lingered in his mind. His father was asking questions. That could only mean trouble. Lucas knew he needed to stay ahead of whatever William was planning, but the closer he got to Eva and the group, the harder it became to justify his silence. Each interaction with Eva chipped away at his resolve to keep his true identity hidden. By the time Eva arrived, Lucas had already finished most of the prep work. She seemed surprised but pleased to see him so focused. "Early start?" she asked, pulling on her apron. "Figured I'd try to make up for yesterday," Lucas replied, offering her a small smile. Eva chuckled. "You weren't that bad, but I won't complain if you keep this up." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Caleb, clipboard in hand, and his signature confident stride in full effect. Lucas couldn't suppress the slight tightening of his jaw as Caleb greeted Eva with his usual charm. "Morning, team," Caleb said, flashing a grin as he approached. "I've got some updates on the rally plans." Eva perked up. "Already?" That was fast. Caleb shrugged, feigning modesty. "I made a few calls, pulled some strings. We've got a potential permit lined up, and I'm talking to a local news outlet about covering the event." "That's incredible," Eva said, her excitement genuine. "This could be a game changer." Lucas stayed quiet, focusing on stacking boxes in the truck. He could feel Caleb's gaze flicker toward him, but he refused to engage. There was something about Caleb's smooth efficiency that didn't sit right with him. It felt calculated, like every move was designed to put him one step ahead of everyone else. Eva and Caleb continued discussing the rally logistics, their voices blending into the background as Lucas's thoughts turned inward. He needed to find a way to uncover what Caleb was really up to. If Caleb had ulterior motives, Lucas wasn't going to let him derail everything Eva had worked so hard to build. As the morning rush began to pick up, the trio fell into their usual rhythm. Customers lined up at the food truck, and Lucas busied himself assembling orders while Eva worked the counter. Caleb occasionally stepped in to chat with customers, slipping in subtle mentions of the petition and the upcoming rally. He was undeniably effective, drawing people in with his charisma, but Lucas couldn't help but feel the man's charm was masking something deeper. The tension between the two grew more apparent as the day wore on. While Eva remained focused on their shared mission, Lucas and Caleb exchanged subtle jabs, their rivalry simmering beneath the surface. Eva, ever perceptive, picked up on the friction and decided to address it during a rare lull in the rush. "All right, what's going on with you two?" she asked, placing her hands on her hips as she looked between them. Lucas glanced at Caleb, who merely raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" Caleb asked innocently. "You know what I mean," Eva said, her tone firm. "You've been at each other's throats all morning. If we're going to make this rally work, we need to be a team. So whatever's going on, figure it out." Lucas hesitated, weighing his words carefully. He didn't want to alienate Eva, but he also couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that Caleb wasn't what he seemed. "I just think we should be cautious," he said finally. "Big moves like this rally can backfire if we're not careful." Caleb smirked, his tone dripping with mock concern. "Caution's fine, but hesitation doesn't win fights. If we want the council to take us seriously, we need to make noise." "That noise could alienate people," Lucas countered, his voice steady but firm. "If it looks too aggressive, we lose support." Eva sighed, pinching the bridge of her nose. "Both of you have valid points, but this isn't the time for a debate. We've got a week to pull this off, and we can't afford distractions." The tension hung in the air for a moment before Caleb shrugged, his expression calm, but his eyes sharp. "Fine by me. Let's focus on the work." Lucas didn't reply, instead turning back to the grill to focus on the task at hand. But his unease with Caleb only deepened. Something about the man's insistence on pushing the rally forward felt calculated, as though he had his own agenda. That evening, after the truck had been cleaned and packed away, Lucas lingered in the square, lost in thought. He didn't notice Eva approach until she spoke, her voice soft but firm. "Lucas." He turned to her, startled. "Yeah?" "I need to know something," she said, crossing her arms. "Why are you really here? You're good at what you do, but I can't shake the feeling that there's more to your story." Lucas hesitated, the weight of her question pressing down on him. He opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, his phone buzzed in his pocket. A message flashed across the screen. "Call me. Your dad's losing patience." Eva noticed his distracted expression, her brow furrowing. "Is everything okay?" "Yeah," Lucas said quickly, shoving the phone back into his pocket. "Just tired. Long day." Eva didn't look convinced, but she let it drop. "All right. Get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be even busier." As she walked away, Lucas let out a shaky breath, his thoughts spinning. He knew he couldn't keep up the charade forever. Sooner or later, the truth would come out, and when it did, he wasn't sure if Eva would ever forgive him. The evening air was cool as Eva locked up the food truck, the last rays of sunlight fading behind the tall oaks surrounding the park. Most of the team had already left, their petitions and flyers in tow, but Caleb lingered nearby, leaning casually against a lamppost. His phone glinted in the fading light as he scrolled, his usual polished demeanor unbroken. Eva noticed him and called out, "Still here? Thought you'd be the first to leave after a long day." Caleb glanced up, sliding his phone into his pocket. "Can't let you do all the heavy lifting alone," he replied, a smile playing on his lips. "Besides, I wanted to talk to you about the rally. I've got a few more ideas." She gave him an appreciative nod, walking over to where he stood. "I'm all ears, but keep it short. I'm exhausted." As Caleb began outlining his thoughts on expanding the outreach strategy, Eva's phone buzzed in her pocket. She glanced at the screen and saw Grace's name flashing. Excusing herself, she stepped a few feet away to answer. "Hey Grace, what's up?" Eva asked. Grace's voice was hurried and tinged with unease. "Eva, I think you need to know something about Caleb. I overheard him earlier today. He was on the phone with someone, and it didn't sound good. He mentioned Lucas." Eva's brow furrowed. "Lucas? What about him?" "I'm not sure," Grace admitted. "But it sounded like Caleb's been digging into him, trying to figure something out. It didn't sit right with me." Eva's stomach twisted. She glanced back at Caleb, who was now scrolling through his phone again, oblivious to her scrutiny. "Thanks for letting me know. I'll talk to him." As the call ended, Eva turned back toward Caleb, her earlier exhaustion replaced by a spark of suspicion. "So, who were you texting earlier?" she asked, her tone light but probing. Caleb arched an eyebrow, clearly unfazed. "Just following up with some contacts about the rally. Why?" "Just curious," Eva replied, crossing her arms. She didn't press further, but the conversation with Grace lingered in her mind. Something wasn't adding up, and she wasn't about to ignore it. As the last of the evening light faded into the night, Eva decided to wrap things up with Caleb. She didn't want to let her suspicions cloud her judgment yet, but the unease wouldn't leave her. Caleb, however, seemed perfectly at ease, his demeanor calm and collected as they exchanged goodbyes. "Don't stay up too late," he said with a grin as he walked off into the shadows. "We've got a lot to do tomorrow." Eva nodded absently, watching him disappear down the street. Once he was gone, she locked the truck and started toward her car, her mind racing. Grace's warning played over and over in her head. Why was Caleb so interested in Lucas? And why hadn't he mentioned anything about it to her? The question gnawed at her, but she pushed it aside as she drove home. She needed a clear head if she was going to figure this out. But as fate would have it, the answers came sooner than she expected. The next morning, Eva arrived at the park earlier than usual, hoping for a quiet moment to organize her thoughts before the day began. The square was still, the usual bustle of vendors and early risers not yet in full swing. As she approached the food truck, she heard voices, low, hurried, and unmistakably tense. Peeking around the corner of the truck, she froze. Caleb was standing just a few feet away, his phone pressed to his ear, his tone sharp and focused. "Yeah, I'm telling you, there's something off about him," Caleb said, his back turned to her. "He's not just some random guy looking for work. I've been watching him, and I think he's hiding something." Eva's stomach dropped. Her breath caught as she realized who Caleb was talking about. Lucas. "No, I haven't told her yet," Caleb continued. "But she's smart. She'll figure it out eventually. When she does, it'll be too late for him to explain." Eva stepped back, her pulse pounding in her ears. Her mind raced with questions. What did Caleb know about Lucas? And why hadn't Lucas said anything to her? The sound of Caleb ending the call snapped her out of her thoughts. She ducked behind the truck just as he turned around, her heart hammering in her chest. She waited until his footsteps faded before stepping out from her hiding spot, her thoughts in turmoil. Eva couldn't shake the knot forming in her chest as the morning progressed. The tension between Caleb and Lucas, which had seemed subtle before, now felt glaringly obvious. And while Caleb carried on as though nothing had happened, Eva found herself scrutinizing Lucas more closely, searching for any sign that he might not be who he said he was. By the time the morning rush began to taper off, she could no longer keep her suspicions bottled up. As Lucas handed her an order, she caught his gaze and said quietly, "We need to talk. Now." Lucas blinked, his confusion evident. "What's going on?" "Not here," Eva said firmly, nodding toward the back of the truck. "Now." Lucas followed her, his unease growing with every step. Once they were out of earshot, Eva crossed her arms, her expression a mix of frustration and hurt. "Are you going to tell me what's going on, or do I have to hear it from Caleb?" she asked, her voice low but sharp. Lucas stiffened. "What are you talking about?" "Don't play dumb," Eva snapped. "Caleb's been watching you, and apparently he thinks you're hiding something. So, tell me, who are you really, Lucas? Why are you here?" The question hung in the air, heavy and unrelenting. Lucas opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. For the first time, his charm and quick wit failed him. He looked at Eva, seeing the betrayal in her eyes, and knew there was no turning back now. The truth was about to come out, whether he was ready for it or not. Lucas took a deep breath, his mind scrambling for the right words as Eva stared him down. The air between them felt heavy, charged with tension and the weight of her demand. She deserved the truth, he knew that much. But the reality of confessing was far more daunting than he'd imagined. "I'm not who you think I am," he started, his voice hesitant. He avoided her gaze, focusing instead on the ground as though it might offer him some kind of answer. "My name is Lucas Hastings. My father is William Hastings." Eva's expression froze, her lips parting slightly as the name hit her like a punch. For a moment, she didn't respond, as if her mind was struggling to connect the dots. "You're his son?" she said slowly, her voice laced with disbelief. "The William Hastings? The man behind the project to destroy Riverside Park?" Lucas nodded, his stomach twisting. "Yeah, that's him." Eva's arms dropped to her sides, and she took a step back, as though the distance might somehow help her process what she'd just heard. Her mind raced, replaying every interaction she'd had with Lucas since the day he arrived. Every smile, every shared laugh, every moment where she'd begun to trust him. All of it now felt like a lie. "You lied to me," she said, her voice shaking with a mix of anger and hurt. "This whole time you lied to me. You've been working with us, helping us, and you never thought to mention that you're one of them." "I wasn't working with him," Lucas said quickly, stepping toward her. "I swear, Eva, I took this job because I didn't want to be part of his world. I hated everything about it. I still do." "Then why didn't you say something?" she demanded. "Why keep it a secret?" Lucas hesitated. "Because I was afraid you'd never give me a chance if you knew. I didn't want to be judged by my last name." Ava's laugh was bitter, filled with disbelief. "Judged? Lucas, do you have any idea what your father's company has done to this community, to this park? How could you think I'd ever trust you after this?" He didn't have an answer for her. The silence that followed was deafening, filled with the unspoken words neither of them could bring themselves to say. "I didn't come here to hurt you," Lucas finally said, his voice quiet but firm. "Or to hurt anyone. I came here because I wanted to be different from my father. I wanted to find something real, something that mattered." Ava's eyes narrowed, her anger still simmering just beneath the surface. "And you thought hiding who you really are was the best way to do that? You thought you could just pretend to care about this fight, about this park, while keeping a secret like that?" "I do care," Lucas insisted, his voice rising slightly. "Being here, working with you, seeing how much this park means to everyone, it's changed the way I see things. I don't want to be the kind of person my father is." "Words are easy, Lucas," Eva snapped. "Actions are what matter. And right now, all I see is someone who lied to me." Lucas felt the sting of her words, but he refused to back down. "You have every right to be angry," he said. "I messed up. I should have told you the truth from the start, but I swear, Eva, I'm on your side. I'll do whatever it takes to prove that. Eva crossed her arms, her expression unreadable. For a moment, she looked as though she might say something, but then she shook her head, her frustration evident. I don't even know what to believe anymore. Before Lucas could respond, a voice broke the tension between them. Everything okay here? Caleb's smooth tone cut through the air as he stepped around the corner of the truck, his gaze shifting between Eva and Lucas with calculated interest. Eva stiffened, her jaw tightening as she turned to Caleb. We're fine, she said curtly. Just a conversation. Didn't sound fine, Caleb said, his tone light, but with an edge that made Lucas bristle. Something you want to share with the class? Not now, Caleb, Eva said, her tone sharp enough to end the conversation. She glanced back at Lucas, her eyes hard. We'll finish this later. Lucas opened his mouth to argue, but she turned and walked away, leaving him standing there with Caleb's scrutinizing gaze lingering on him. Caleb's smirk returned as he leaned casually against the truck. Rough day, huh? Caleb said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. Trouble in paradise? Lucas clenched his jaw, his fists tightening at his sides. Not now, Caleb. Relax, Caleb said, holding up his hands in mock surrender. Just making an observation. But you know, secrets have a way of coming out. Maybe you should have thought about that before diving into this little charade. Lucas didn't respond, knowing anything he said would only add fuel to the fire. Instead, he turned and walked away, his mind racing. He couldn't shake the feeling that Caleb knew far more than he was letting on, and that he intended to use it against him. As Lucas disappeared into the shadows, Caleb pulled out his phone, typing out another message to Olivia. You were right. He's hiding more than I thought. This is going to be interesting. Eva, standing alone at the edge of the park, stared out at the trees, swaying in the breeze. Her heart was heavy with the weight of betrayal, but deeper than the anger was a lingering question. Could she really trust anything Lucas had said, or was everything between them just another lie? The following day, Eva arrived at the park with an unshakable heaviness weighing on her. Sleep had been elusive, her mind replaying the confrontation with Lucas over and over. She couldn't decide what bothered her more, his lie or the fact that part of her wanted to believe his intentions were genuine. But trust wasn't something she could afford to gamble with, not when the future of Riverside Park was at stake. The square was already alive with activity as she approached the food truck. Antonia was setting up inside, barking out instructions, while Caleb stood near the petition table, clipboard in hand and his usual air of confidence intact. He waved at Eva as she drew closer, his grin as practiced as ever. Morning, Caleb said, his tone cheerful but slightly probing. You okay? You seemed off yesterday. Eva forced a tight smile. I'm fine. Just a lot on my mind. Fair enough, he replied, studying her briefly before holding up the clipboard. I've been thinking about the rally. We should finalize the details today. Permits, speaker lineup, all of it. If we want to make a splash, we can't leave anything to chance. Eva nodded, appreciating the distraction. You're right. Let's go over everything after the morning rush. As they spoke, Lucas appeared from the direction of the parking lot, his expression a mixture of determination and unease. He hesitated when he saw Eva and Caleb together, but after a brief pause, he walked toward them. Ava's shoulders stiffened as she braced herself for another tense interaction. Morning, Lucas said cautiously, his eyes meeting Eva's. Morning, she replied, her tone clipped. She didn't offer anything more, her guarded demeanor making it clear the conversation wasn't over in her mind. Caleb, sensing the tension, seized the moment. Lucas, perfect timing. We're just talking about the rally. You know, big moves, big impact, hope you're ready. Lucas glanced at him, his jaw tightening. I'm here to help, Whatever's needed. Good to hear, Caleb said, his smile never wavering. We're counting on everyone to pull their weight. The subtle jab wasn't lost on Lucas, but he chose to let it slide, focusing instead on Ava. I need to talk to you, he said quietly. When you have a minute. Ava hesitated, then nodded. Later. Right now, we have work to do. Lucas nodded back, though the coldness in her voice stung more than he expected. As the three of them moved to their respective tasks, the strained dynamic between them was impossible to ignore. The day unfolded in a flurry of activity as the team worked to gather more signatures and finalize plans for the rally. The square was busier than usual, with locals stopping by to sign petitions or grab a quick bite from the food truck. Despite the outward hustle, the tension between Eva, Lucas, and Caleb simmered just beneath the surface. Caleb was in his element, moving effortlessly between tasks, his charm drawing people in as he secured their signatures. His every action seemed calculated, designed to make himself indispensable to the cause. Lucas, on the other hand, kept his head down, focusing on the work without engaging in Caleb's usual banter. Ava noticed the difference, but she was too preoccupied to address it. Her mind split between the demands of the day and the unanswered questions swirling around Lucas. By mid-afternoon, the trio regrouped at the petition table. Caleb handed Eva a fresh stack of filled petition sheets, his smile triumphant. That puts us well over the threshold. If this rally goes as planned, the council will have no choice but to listen. That's great, Eva said, managing a small smile. She glanced at Lucas, who was leaning against the edge of the table, looking as though he wanted to say something but couldn't find the right words. Lucas, she said finally, breaking the silence. About earlier. Let's talk now. Caleb's expression shifted slightly, though he quickly masked it with a neutral look. I'll leave you two to it, he said, stepping away, but not before throwing Lucas a lingering glance. Once Caleb was out of earshot, Eva turned to Lucas, her arms crossed. I need to know everything, Lucas. No more half-truths, no more dodging. If you're serious about helping us, you need to be honest with me, with all of us. Lucas hesitated, his hands fidgeting as he struggled to find the words. I told you the truth yesterday. I came here to get away from my father's world. I wanted to figure out who I am, outside of all that. And the park? Ava pressed. What does it mean to you? Lucas met her gaze, his voice steady. It means more than I ever expected. Being here, working with you and everyone else, it's opened my eyes. I see now what this place represents, and I want to fight for it. Not because it's convenient, but because it's right. Eva studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Finally, she spoke. You've got a lot to prove, Lucas, and not just to me, to everyone who's put their trust in this cause. I know, Lucas said quietly, and I will. Before Eva could respond, Caleb returned, his timing impeccable as always. Everything all right? He asked, his tone polite but probing. Fine, Eva said, though her tone suggested the conversation wasn't over. She glanced between the two men, her resolve hardening. Let's get back to work. As the afternoon stretched into evening, Lucas threw himself into the tasks at hand, determined to show Eva he meant what he'd said. Caleb, meanwhile, watched from the sidelines, his sharp eyes missing nothing. Whatever game Caleb was playing, Lucas knew it wasn't over, and he wasn't about to let Caleb derail the progress they'd made. Eva, caught between her growing doubts and the fight for the park, resolved to stay focused on the cause. But deep down, she knew the coming days would test all of them in ways none of them could anticipate. The day of the rally arrived, and Riverside Park was alive with energy. Volunteers bustled about, setting up tables, hanging banners, and arranging chairs in front of the makeshift stage. The park's usual tranquility had been replaced with the hum of voices and the sound of a small band warming up near the edge of the crowd. Ava stood near the stage, clipboard in hand, directing the final preparations. Her face was calm, but the tension in her shoulders betrayed her nerves. Lucas arrived early, carrying a box of water bottles to the volunteer tent. He avoided the stage area where Eva and Caleb were coordinating, knowing his presence might add unnecessary friction. Instead, he focused on helping the other volunteers, keeping his head down and his hands busy. It was easier that way, easier to prove his worth through action than to confront the lingering mistrust in Eva's eyes. Nearby, Caleb was in his element, rallying volunteers with his usual enthusiasm and charm. He moved through the crowd with a practiced ease, his voice carrying over the din as he encouraged people to sign petitions and share their stories. His energy was infectious, drawing people in like moths to a flame. But for all his outward charisma, Lucas couldn't ignore the calculating edge behind Caleb's smile. As the crowd grew larger, Ava called the team together for a final briefing. "This rally is about showing the council what this park means to the community," she said, her voice steady despite the nerves she felt. "Every person here is a testament to the importance of this space. Let's make sure they hear us." The team nodded, their determination evident. Lucas caught Eva's eye as the group dispersed, but before he could approach her, Caleb stepped in, clapping Lucas on the shoulder. "You ready for this?" Caleb asked, his tone light but with an undercurrent of something sharper. Lucas forced a smile. "I'm here to help. That's all that matters." Caleb chuckled, his grip lingering for a moment before he released Lucas and turned back to the stage. Lucas watched him go, the unease in his chest growing. Something about Caleb's confidence felt off, like he was a step ahead of everyone else. As the rally began, Ava took the stage, her voice carrying over the crowd as she shared her passion for the park and its significance to the community. The audience responded with cheers and applause, their energy filling the space. Lucas watched from the sidelines, pride and admiration flickering in his chest despite the uncertainty of his place in all of this. As Ava continued her speech, the crowd grew more energized, their cheers echoing through the park. She spoke with conviction, weaving personal stories of families, children, and history tied to Riverside Park. Her words painted a vivid picture of what the space meant, not just as a physical location, but as the heart of the community. "We're here today because this park is more than land," Ava said, her voice steady and commanding. "It's memories. It's connections. It's a reminder that some things are worth protecting no matter how powerful the opposition might be." The crowd erupted in applause, and Ava stepped back, her chest rising and falling as she caught her breath. Caleb approached the microphone next, his confident smile firmly in place. "Let's keep that energy going," Caleb began, his voice smooth and practiced. "We've come together today to stand for something bigger than ourselves. But this rally is only the beginning. We need to keep fighting, louder, harder, and stronger than ever." As Caleb spoke, Lucas lingered near the back of the crowd, his unease growing. There was something in Caleb's tone, a subtle shift in his words that felt almost too calculated. Lucas's suspicions only deepened when Caleb began to steer the focus away from the community and more toward his own involvement. "It's been an honor to work alongside Eva and the rest of this incredible team," Caleb said, his grin widening. "Together, we've brought this cause to life, and with your help, we'll take it even further." Lucas clenched his fists, the subtle self-aggrandizement not lost on him. Caleb wasn't here to support the cause. He was here to position himself as the face of it. Lucas scanned the crowd, noticing a few skeptical glances among the applause. Clearly, he wasn't the only one picking up on Caleb's true motives. As Caleb wrapped up his speech and handed the microphone back to Eva, Lucas caught sight of a familiar figure on the edge of the park. Olivia Morgan stood near a tree, her sharp gaze fixed on the stage. She was dressed in business casual attire, her phone in hand as she typed out a message. Lucas's stomach dropped. If Olivia was here, it meant trouble, and not just for him. He pushed through the crowd, his mind racing. Was she here to watch Caleb, to gather intel on the rally, or worse, to use this as an opportunity to undermine their efforts? Whatever her reason, Lucas knew her presence couldn't mean anything good. Reaching the edge of the park, Lucas paused a few feet from Olivia, his jaw tightening. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice low. Olivia turned to him, her smile sharp and knowing. "Just observing. You've been busy, Lucas. Quite the little activist now, aren't you?" "This isn't your fight," Lucas said through gritted teeth. "Leave." "Oh, but it is," Olivia replied, her tone icy. "You think your little rebellion has gone unnoticed. William knows everything, Lucas, and trust me, he's not happy." Lucas's chest tightened, but he kept his voice steady. "If you're here to cause trouble, you can forget it. This rally isn't about Hastings Enterprises. It's about the community." Olivia smirked, clearly unimpressed. "Whatever helps you sleep at night. Just remember, Lucas, you're still a Hastings, and the longer you stay here, the harder it's going to be for everyone." Before he could respond, Olivia turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. Lucas stood frozen, her words echoing in his mind. He knew she wasn't bluffing, and the reality of his double life felt heavier than ever. As the rally concluded and the crowd began to disperse, Ava approached Lucas, her expression softening as she saw the tension etched into his face. "Hey," she said gently, "you okay?" Lucas hesitated, his instinct to hide the encounter with Olivia clashing with the growing desire to be honest with Eva. "I need to tell you something," he said finally, his voice quiet. "But not here." Eva frowned, but nodded, sensing the weight in his words. "All right, let's talk later." As the park emptied, Lucas knew one thing for certain. Whatever he told Ava next would change everything. And with Olivia now circling, the clock was ticking faster than ever. The atmosphere at the park was markedly different the day after the rally. The tables and banners had been cleared, and the usual stillness of Riverside Park had returned. But for Lucas, the calm was an illusion. Olivia's appearance at the rally lingered in his mind like a shadow, her words playing on repeat. "William knows everything." It wasn't just a warning, it was a ticking time bomb. Lucas paced near the food truck, his thoughts racing. He needed to tell Eva everything before Olivia, or worse, his father, made their next move. But how could he do that without shattering what little trust they'd managed to rebuild? He glanced toward Ava, who was chatting with Grace near the petition table. She looked calm, almost happy, a stark contrast to the storm brewing inside him. He didn't have much time to act. Olivia wouldn't just sit back and watch. If he waited too long, she'd make her move, and it would be far worse than anything he could imagine. Taking a deep breath, Lucas walked toward Eva, his steps heavy with purpose. She noticed him approaching and tilted her head, her smile faltering slightly at the seriousness in his expression. "Lucas," she said, a hint of concern in her voice. "What's going on?" "We need to talk," he said, his tone low. He glanced at Grace, who immediately picked up on the tension and gave them a nod. "I'll catch up with you later," Grace said, excusing herself with a reassuring pat on Eva's shoulder. Once they were alone, Lucas hesitated, his words catching in his throat. He hated this, hated how every step forward seemed to come with a dozen steps back. But there was no avoiding it now. "Olivia was at the rally yesterday," he began, watching Eva's reaction closely. Her eyes narrowed. "Olivia? As in—" "Yes," Lucas interrupted. "She works with my father. She's one of his top people, and she's here because of me." Eva's brow furrowed, confusion and suspicion mingling in her expression. "Why? What does she want?" "She's keeping tabs on me," Lucas admitted, "and probably on all of this." He gestured toward the park around them. "She said my father knows about everything I've been doing here, and he's not happy." Eva crossed her arms, her demeanor shifting from confusion to frustration. "So what does that mean? Is he going to try to stop us?" "I don't know," Lucas said honestly. "But Olivia doesn't show up without a reason. Whatever it is, it's not good." Eva took a deep breath, processing Lucas's words. The thought of William Hastings targeting their efforts made her stomach turn, but what unsettled her even more was Lucas's role in all of it. She stared at him, searching for some reassurance, something that would prove he wasn't just another piece in his father's game. "So, what are you going to do?" Eva asked finally, her voice steady but tinged with a challenge. Lucas hesitated, the weight of her question pressing down on him. "I don't have all the answers yet, but I know one thing. I'm not going to let my father destroy this park. I'll fight him if I have to." Eva raised an eyebrow. "How? You're his son. He's got money, power, connections. What do you have?" "Everything I've learned here," Lucas said firmly. "Everything you've taught me. I may not have his resources, but I know what's right, and if it comes down to it, I'll use whatever influence I have to help you." Her expression softened slightly, but the tension in her shoulders didn't ease. "This isn't just about you, Lucas. If your father retaliates, it's not just us who'll suffer, it's the entire community." "I know," Lucas said, his voice quieter now. "That's why I wanted to tell you, so we can be ready." Eva studied him for a long moment, her mind racing with possibilities. She wanted to trust him, but the stakes were too high for blind faith. Finally, she nodded, though her gaze remained cautious. "All right, if you're serious about this, we'll need a plan. A real one." Lucas exhaled in relief, though he knew this was only the beginning. "I'll do whatever it takes." Eva glanced over her shoulder, her eyes scanning the park. "First, we need to figure out what Olivia's planning. She wouldn't just show up to watch." Lucas nodded. "I'll keep an eye on her. If she's here, she's bound to slip up eventually." "And while you're doing that," Eva added, her voice growing sharper, "you need to prove to the rest of the team that you're here for the right reasons. Caleb's been watching you, and I can't afford for this group to fall apart because of infighting." Lucas's jaw tightened at the mention of Caleb, but he nodded. "I'll handle it." Eva didn't say anything else, but the unspoken weight of their conversation lingered as she turned and walked back toward the petition table. Lucas watched her go, determination hardening in his chest. He had a long way to go to earn her trust, but he'd made his choice. As he turned to head back to the truck, a movement caught his eye. Near the edge of the park, Olivia stood once again, her sharp gaze fixed on him. She raised a hand in a small, mocking wave before disappearing into the crowd. Lucas clenched his fists, his resolve solidifying. This wasn't just about the park anymore. It was about proving to himself and to everyone else that he was more than his family name, and he was ready to fight for it. Lucas stood at the edge of the park early the next morning, the first rays of sunlight breaking through the canopy of oak trees. The quiet serenity of Riverside Park felt at odds with the growing storm he knew was coming. He had spent most of the night replaying his conversation with Ava, trying to figure out his next move. He needed to act, and he needed to act fast. He glanced down at his phone, scrolling through messages he hadn't replied to yet. Nathan had texted multiple times, urging him to call and warning him about their father's growing impatience. Lucas knew what that meant. William Hastings wasn't going to sit idly by while his son defied him. Olivia's appearance at the rally had only confirmed that. Determined, Lucas shoved his phone into his pocket and turned toward the truck, where Antonia was already prepping for the morning rush. The usual bustling energy of the team wasn't there yet. Eva hadn't arrived, and Caleb was conspicuously absent. Lucas didn't mind the temporary quiet. It gave him time to think. As he began helping Antonia, Grace appeared, her usual cheerful demeanor replaced by a look of concern. She approached him cautiously, holding a clipboard full of signatures. "Lucas," she said, her tone soft but urgent. "Can we talk for a minute?" He set down the stack of cups he was organizing and turned to her, his brow furrowing. "What's going on?" Grace hesitated, glancing over her shoulder as if to make sure no one was listening. "It's about Caleb," she said finally. "I overheard him talking to someone on the phone last night. He mentioned Olivia. He said something about keeping an eye on you." Lucas's chest tightened. "What exactly did he say?" Grace shook her head. "I didn't catch all of it, but it sounded like he's been feeding her information. I think he's working with her, Lucas." Lucas let out a slow breath, his mind racing. He had suspected Caleb of having his own agenda, but the confirmation hit harder than he expected. If Caleb was working with Olivia, it meant their efforts to save the park were in even greater danger than he'd thought. "Does Eva know?" Lucas asked, his voice low. Grace shook her head again. "Not yet. I didn't want to say anything until I was sure." "Good call," Lucas said, his jaw tightening. "Let me handle this." Grace looked at him, her concern evident. "Be careful, Lucas. Whatever he's planning, it can't be good." Lucas nodded, gratitude flickering in his eyes. "Thanks for telling me." As Grace walked away, Lucas's mind churned with possibilities. If Caleb was working with Olivia, it explained so much. The constant undercurrent of competition, the sly jabs, and the way Caleb always seemed to position himself at the center of everything. But what was his endgame? Was he trying to sabotage the group, or was he angling for something bigger? Whatever it was, Lucas couldn't let him succeed. By the time Eva arrived, the morning bustle had begun in earnest. She stepped out of her car with her usual purposeful stride, but Lucas could see the weariness in her eyes. The fight to save the park was taking its toll, and he knew the last thing she needed was more complications. Still, he had no choice but to tell her what Grace had overheard. "Eva," Lucas called, approaching her as she unloaded a box of supplies from her car. "We need to talk. It's important." Her expression tightened, but she nodded, setting the box down. "All right. What's going on?" Lucas glanced around to ensure no one was within earshot before lowering his voice. "It's Caleb. Grace overheard him talking to Olivia. She thinks he's been feeding her information about us." Eva's face hardened, her eyes narrowing. "Are you sure?" "She didn't catch everything," Lucas admitted. "But it fits. Think about it. He's always pushing to be the center of attention, always trying to take control. And Olivia showing up at the rally? That's not a coincidence." Eva crossed her arms, her jaw tightening as she processed his words. "If he's working with her, it's a betrayal to all of us. We need to confront him." "Not yet," Lucas said quickly. "If we go at him now without proof, it'll just create chaos. Let me dig a little deeper. I'll figure out what he's planning." Eva hesitated, her eyes searching his. "And what if he finds out you're onto him?" "Then I'll deal with it," Lucas said firmly. "But we can't afford to let him undermine everything we've worked for. Not now." Eva studied him for a long moment, then nodded reluctantly. "All right, but be careful, Lucas. If you're wrong about this—" "I'm not," he said, his voice steady. "I'll handle it." As they parted ways, Lucas felt the weight of the decision settle on his shoulders. He didn't know how far Caleb was willing to go, but one thing was clear. The battle for Riverside Park wasn't just about the council anymore. It was a fight against betrayal, manipulation, and the forces trying to tear them apart from within. That afternoon, as the team worked to prepare for the next phase of their campaign, Lucas kept a close eye on Caleb. The man was as charismatic as ever, moving through the group with his usual ease, but Lucas noticed the cracks in his facade, the way his gaze lingered on Eva when she wasn't looking, the subtle tension in his jaw whenever Lucas got too close. By mid-afternoon, Lucas had his opportunity. Caleb stepped away from the group to take a call, moving toward the far edge of the park. Lucas followed at a distance, staying out of sight but close enough to hear snippets of the conversation. "Everything's in place," Caleb was saying, his tone low and hurried. "Once the council meeting is over, they'll be forced to listen. She'll have no choice but to trust me." Lucas frowned, his suspicion deepening. He couldn't hear the other side of the conversation, but Caleb's tone was enough to confirm his worst fears. He wasn't just working with Olivia. He was positioning himself as the savior of the movement, manipulating Eva and the group to serve his own agenda. Before Caleb could finish the call, Lucas stepped out from behind the tree, his expression cold. "Who are you talking to?" Caleb turned sharply, his surprise quickly morphing into a smirk. "Ah, Lucas. Eavesdropping, are we?" "Cut the act," Lucas said, his voice low and sharp. "I know you're working with Olivia. What's your plan, Caleb? To tear this group apart from the inside?" Caleb's smirk widened, but his eyes remained hard. "You're awfully bold for someone who's been lying about who he is since day one." Lucas took a step closer, his fists clenching at his sides. "This isn't about me. It's about what you're doing to Eva and everyone else. If you think I'm going to let you manipulate them, you're dead wrong." Caleb's gaze darkened, the smugness slipping from his face. "You don't understand, Lucas. I'm doing what needs to be done. If that means stepping on a few toes, so be it." "That's not leadership," Lucas shot back. "That's self-interest." For a moment, the two men stared each other down, the tension crackling between them. Finally, Caleb broke the silence, his voice low and threatening. "Stay out of my way, Lucas. You don't know what you're up against." Lucas didn't flinch. "Neither do you." As Caleb walked away, Lucas felt a surge of determination. The fight for the park was far from over, but now he knew the battle lines weren't just drawn against his father, they were drawn within their own ranks, and he was ready to face whatever came next. The day of the city council meeting arrived, and the tension in the air was palpable. Riverside Park was quieter than usual, its paths and open spaces seemingly holding their breath alongside the community that had gathered to fight for its survival. Eva stood near the stage they'd set up for one last rally before the meeting, clutching her clipboard as she scanned the growing crowd. Volunteers hustled to hand out flyers and organize final signatures, their voices a blend of urgency and hope. Lucas arrived early, carrying a box of extra supplies. He kept his head down, trying to blend into the background as much as possible. His confrontation with Caleb the day before still weighed on him, and he couldn't shake the feeling that Caleb was planning something big. Despite Caleb's warning to stay out of his way, Lucas had no intention of stepping aside. He had come too far to let someone like Caleb undermine everything they had worked for. As the rally began, Eva took the stage, her voice steady but filled with emotion. She thanked the community for their unwavering support and spoke passionately about the importance of the park, not just as a piece of land, but as a symbol of unity, history, and hope. The crowd cheered, their voices rising in unison as they chanted, "Save Riverside Park!" Lucas watched from the sidelines, pride and admiration swelling in his chest. But his focus was split. His eyes kept darting toward Caleb, who stood near the edge of the stage, his expression unreadable. Lucas couldn't tell if Caleb was impressed, annoyed, or simply waiting for his moment to strike. As Ava wrapped up her speech, she called Lucas to the stage, surprising him. He hesitated, his heart pounding, but the crowd's applause urged him forward. Standing beside Ava, he felt the weight of the moment settle over him. "This is Lucas," Eva said, her voice warm but firm. "He's been working with us, fighting for this park just as hard as anyone else here. And today, he wants to say something to all of you." Lucas froze for a brief second, his eyes scanning the sea of faces before him. He took a deep breath, gripping the edges of the podium as he began to speak. "I didn't grow up understanding the importance of places like Riverside Park," he admitted, his voice steady despite the nerves roiling in his stomach. "I grew up in a world where everything had a price, where people only saw the value of land in terms of dollars and profit. But being here, working alongside all of you, has shown me something different. This park isn't just land, it's a lifeline. It's history, it's home." The crowd erupted into cheers, and Lucas felt a flicker of hope. But just as the noise began to die down, a voice cut through the air. "Nice speech, Lucas," Caleb said, stepping forward with a smirk. "But I think the people deserve to know the full truth about you." The crowd quieted, murmurs spreading as Caleb strode to the center of the stage. Lucas's stomach dropped as Caleb turned to the audience, his smile sharp. "Did he mention that he's Lucas Hastings?" Caleb said, his tone laced with mockery. "Son of William Hastings, the man responsible for trying to destroy this park in the first place?" The crowd gasped, and all eyes turned to Lucas. He stood frozen, the weight of Caleb's revelation crashing down on him. Ava's face paled, her eyes widening as she processed the betrayal. For a moment, the world seemed to stop. The crowd erupted into murmurs, their confusion and anger rippling through the air like a storm. Lucas stood rooted to the spot, his hands gripping the edges of the podium as if it were the only thing keeping him upright. He could feel the weight of every gaze, questions, accusations, and disappointment all bearing down on him. But the one that hurt the most was Eva's. She was staring at him, her face pale, her expression a mixture of shock and hurt. Eva stepped forward, her voice cutting through the noise. "Is it true?" she asked, her tone quiet but firm. "Are you his son?" Lucas turned to her, his heart pounding. "Yes," he said finally, his voice steady despite the lump in his throat. "It's true. My father is William Hastings." The crowd's murmurs grew louder, but Ava raised her hand, silencing them. "And you didn't think to tell me? To tell any of us?" "I wanted to," Lucas said, his voice pleading, "but I was afraid. I knew if I told you the truth you'd never give me the chance to prove myself, and I needed to prove it, to you, to myself, that I'm not him." Caleb seized the moment, stepping closer with a triumphant smirk. "You see? This is who you've been trusting. A Hastings, the very name that represents everything we're fighting against." Lucas's jaw tightened, but he refused to look away from Eva. "I'm not my father," he said, his voice resolute. "I came here to get away from that world, to figure out who I really am. And yes, I made mistakes, but everything I've done here, every flyer, every petition, every late night at this park, was real. I'm on your side." The crowd fell silent, their eyes darting between Lucas and Eva. She stood frozen for a moment, her gaze locked on his. Then she stepped forward, her voice cutting through the stillness. "You've been lying to us, Lucas, that's a fact. But I've seen the work you've put in, and I know you've fought for this park as hard as any of us." Lucas blinked, surprised by her words. Eva turned to the crowd, her voice growing louder. "What matters now isn't his name. It's what he's done, and what he's willing to do to save this park." Caleb's smirk faltered, his confidence wavering. "You're really going to defend him?" he demanded. "After everything he's hidden from us?" Ava shot him a glare. "Yes, because unlike you, Lucas hasn't been working behind our backs. I know about your little phone calls with Olivia, Caleb. I know you've been feeding her information." The crowd gasped again, their attention snapping to Caleb. His smug expression vanished, replaced by a flicker of panic. "I was doing what needed to be done," he said defensively. "Olivia has resources we could use. I was trying to protect the cause." "By selling us out?" Eva challenged, stepping closer to him. "You weren't protecting the cause, Caleb. You were protecting yourself." Lucas watched as the crowd's anger shifted, their frustration now directed at Caleb. For the first time, he saw cracks in Caleb's confidence, the calculated veneer slipping away. Eva turned back to the crowd, her voice rising. "This park is worth fighting for, and we need to do it together. No lies, no secrets, no hidden agendas. If we stand united, we can win." The crowd erupted into cheers, their energy renewed. Caleb, realizing he'd lost, slinked away from the stage, his shoulders stiff with defeat. Lucas exhaled deeply, relief flooding through him as he turned back to Eva. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for believing in me." Eva's gaze softened, though her expression remained serious. "You've still got a lot to prove, Lucas, but I'm willing to give you that chance." The council meeting that followed was tense, but the momentum from the rally carried them through. Eva presented their case with passion and precision, supported by the hundreds of signatures they had gathered. Lucas stood by her side, adding his voice to the fight and using his family name to highlight the damage the Hastings project would cause. By the end of the meeting, the council announced their decision. The development would be halted, and Riverside Park would be preserved as a protected community space. The crowd outside erupted into cheers as the news spread, their months of hard work finally paying off. Later that evening, as the park returned to its usual calm, Eva and Lucas stood beneath the canopy of oak trees. The lights from the city twinkled in the distance, and the cool night air carried the faint sound of laughter from a nearby group of children playing. "We did it," Lucas said, his voice soft with awe. Eva smiled, though her gaze remained thoughtful. "We did. But it's not just about saving the park. It's about what we do next, how we keep it safe for future generations." Lucas nodded, his chest swelling with a sense of purpose he'd never felt before. "Whatever comes next, I'm in, all the way." Eva turned to him, her expression finally softening. "Good, because this fight isn't over. But with people like you standing with us, I think we might just have a chance." As they stood together, the weight of the past finally lifting, Lucas realized he had found something he'd been searching for his entire life, a place where he truly belonged.